I'm Adam Booth and you're watching Sporting Icons.
Alright, so yesterday I asked you all the question here on YouTube on the community section. Of course, I understand not everybody gets to see it. I don't know the reasons why. But anyway, I asked you all the question, which of the sanctioning bodies do you think are the best? Or is the best? Who's the best sanctioning body? Now, of course, the usual suspects, WBC, WBA, IBF, WBO, and Ring Magazine. Yes, I understand Ring Magazine is not a official sanctioning body. I know some people saying that maybe I should have either, firstly, not used option 5 or maybe put in the IBO. Okay, all fair points, but I think that the Ring Magazine, it is a prestigious title. It is about that people will look at and usually in some ways look on as lineal. I know lineal, Ring Magazine, they are totally different, but they should in some ways run side by side. It's the Rocky Balboa belt, okay? Now, when it comes to the votes, most of you, 62%, said that IBF is the best one. Now, it doesn't really matter what the other percentages are, because obviously it's not a vote where you can go, okay, well, I think the IBF is the best, the WBC are second best, and then the WBO, and okay, unfortunately, YouTube doesn't give us that option. It's a case of click one, and that's pretty much your vote, okay? So I don't necessarily put it in order for where the other ones follow, if that makes sense, but I think it probably wouldn't be too far wrong if we was to put it in option of the IBF being number 1, the Ring Magazine being number 2, WBC being number 3, WBO being number 4, and the WBA last. It's probably not too far off it now, is it? Maybe WBO, WBC probably sort them around. Now, of course, within the comment section, a lot of you have been saying things that, of course, I've been saying, other people have as well. But some other ones as well, where I can totally agree with a lot of the comments. Some things I hadn't really thought about too deeply, but a lot of people feel that the IBF is the best one, not necessarily because their rankings are the best, because I think most of us could probably agree out of all of them, it's probably the Ring Magazine are probably the best ones, followed by the WBC. The IBF, they do tend to rank a lot of obscure fighters that we don't know who they are, like a lot of European kind of fighters, or out there in Africa or Southeast Asia or wherever it may be. Okay, but that doesn't mean that they're not very good. It just means that we don't know who they are because they haven't had the platform for us to get to know them. I suppose that's one way of looking at it. But I think people prefer the IBF because they are the ones who do actually stick to their rules. They're probably the least biased of the lot. And if they do have any kind of bias in them, it does tend to be for the small hall shows. Okay, such as, say, Dennis Hobson's show, for example. There will usually be a form of an IBF belt on the kind of show. So if they're going to be biased, it's probably to those kind of ones rather than the major players such as Eddie Hearn, Al Heyman, and Bob Arum, and Oscar De La Hoya, and what have you. But when they call a mandatory, of course, we're still talking about the IBF here. When they call a mandatory, you better believe whoever that champion is, you are going to defend that IBF world title against their mandatory. Whether you agree with who their mandatory is or not, you are going to fight this one. If not, we'll strip you. And you do have to respect it, as harsh as what it may be at times. You have to respect them because it doesn't matter if you're Anthony Joshua. It doesn't matter if you're Canelo Alvarez. It doesn't matter if you're Triple G. It doesn't matter if you're Tyson Fury. In fact, Canelo has been stripped of it before. Tyson Fury has been stripped of it before. So it doesn't really matter who you are, you're going to have to fight that mandatory. So you do have to respect them, as harsh as they may come across it sometimes. They have their rules and they will follow them. Don't care who you are or who you think you are, how much money that we get in sanction fees or whatever. It doesn't matter. Our rules are our rules. The other ones seem to be a bit more flexible. So I think a lot of people are choosing the IBF for that reason. Again, on the comments as well, a lot of people saying that they don't really like the WBO too much because they're very, very biased when it comes to Frank Warren and Bob Arum. Very, very biased. And for me, and most of you will agree, no sanctioning body should be biased towards any promotional company, promotional network, managers, fighters. I don't care who you are, you shouldn't be biased towards any of them. This is the world of boxing. Okay, these are the official people. It's one thing for the likes of me to be biased. I'm just a YouTube numpty. But when you're a sanctioning body, you have to be perfectly neutral. The WBO are not. Well, I say they're not, they appear not to be. If you look at a lot of their rankings, they either seem to be Bob Arum or Frank Warren fighter based. If you look at the champions, they seem to be Frank Warren, Bob Arum based for the most part, don't they? And they have done for quite some years. But again, we understand that they appreciate the likes of Bob Arum and Frank Warren for helping them out in the beginning, making them a major player. Because at one time they weren't. The IBO were, in some ways. But when it comes to the WBC, I think most people will probably choose the WBC because their rankings are pretty good. But what most people are very, very upset with, and people can call me biased all you like because of like a Dillian White, but a lot of you feel the same way. If it wasn't for the Dillian White situation, if it wasn't for the fact that they have been allowing him to not get a world title shot for a long, long time and keep messing him about, I think that the WBC will be a lot more favourable for a lot of people because their rankings, we're never going to agree with anybody's rankings, especially in the order, but their rankings are not terrible. They're not brilliant, but they're not terrible. Their rules with the FADA program, people can agree with that. They want a clean sport of boxing. People can agree with that. They will reprimand and review the judges, review the referees, all that kind of thing. They will do that. But again, people don't like the fact that they will create franchise championships and things like that. So there's a lot of pros for the WBC, but there's a lot of negatives for the WBC as well. When it comes to the WBA, they're just, I don't know, they seem to be rotten all around. From a fan's perspective, and most of you will agree with that, is that they seem to be rotten from the core. If there's something wrong with the spine, the body is going to feel the effects. And that seems to be the problem with the WBA. Their rankings are the worst that we've ever seen. They are the worst. Just look at the heavyweight division ones. They are absolutely diabolical to the point where we have to say, this can't just be incompetence. Surely this has to be a lot of bias and maybe a lot of corruption. Is that fact? No, of course not. It's an opinion because nobody can be that bad, can be that incompetent that you would put these kind of rankings out there for the world to see. Now, granted, all sanctioning bodies will rank certain fighters based on petitioning, which I totally agree with. That should be abolished. No manager, promoter, or anybody should have to petition for their fighter to be ranked in a certain position. You shouldn't have to do that. They should just look at it and base it on merit. That's what it should be. But a lot of it is based on money. And the WBA seem quite blatant about it, with the fact of their judge. Just over a week ago. Was it Rozzo, where her name was? That has come to light. Their rankings are terrible. They are awful. They're very, very biased when it comes to the PBC and Al Heyman. They are overly biased. It shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't even be a discussion. I mean, people say that WBO are biased with Warren and Arum, but the WBA recently, especially like the last year or so, have been blatantly biased. Blatantly. And I can go on and on and on about the WBA being rotten from the core. And if anybody should be kicked out of boxing, it should be them. Which is a shame because they are the oldest boxing organisation. They are the oldest sanctioning body. So they should be the ones leading by example, but they're not. They're falling way behind the rest. I think most people, if there was a legitimate vote that went out there and said, okay, choose the WBA to be the major player or the IBO to be a major player, people will probably choose the IBO. As bad as what they are. Because, again, they don't call mandatories and things like that. Now, moving on to the Ring Magazine. Again, a lot of people say that they're not really a sanctioning body because of the fees and things like that and say how they're owned by Oscar De La Hoya and whatever else. But I think for them to be a major player, I mean, firstly, they don't have to do too much because I think the fans pretty much accept them as an important part of boxing. They do. And we're not just talking about their magazines and their articles. We're talking about the belt, the title itself. Whoever owns the Ring Magazine belt should really be the number one in that particular division. Granted, it doesn't always work out that way, but a lot of people have a lot of respect for that belt. It's a old belt, it's a very historical belt, and people do look on it with a lot of reverence to to say, yes, it should be a major sanctioning body, but at the same time, they don't call mandatories. They don't. And to be a legitimate sanctioning body, you do need that as a bare minimum. You should be calling your mandatories. There's no way, for example, we can look at the heavyweight division. Tyson Fury is the Ring Magazine champion. He should not be running around and defending it against, say, I don't know, Otto Wallin and Tom Schwartz and Francesco Pianetta and Sefer Ferry, these kind of guys. Don't be wrong, he hasn't been, because obviously they stripped him of the belt before he even did that. But then, of course, won it in the Wilder rematch. So as of yet, he hasn't done that. But if he wanted to, he could. And they ain't going to stop him from doing it. That's the point. That's an issue. If you've got your rankings there, and it's great, of course, they use all the sanctioning bodies, okay? They will say, for example, Tyson Fury's number 1, Anthony Joshua's number 2, Dillian White's number 3, and Wilder and whoever, whatever kind of order that they have. It's great that they will put them all into like the same mix as an overall. Because obviously, if you're like a WBC, you can't rank the WBA champion, for example. If you're the IBF champion or sanctioning body, you can't rank the WBC or the WBA. It's that kind of thing. But the Ring Magazine can. So for me, I think that whoever is the champion, they should, of course, need to try and get somewhat of a unification. And for me, I do feel that you should need the Ring Magazine to become undisputed. I think that you should need it, but you don't. For example, currently, Anthony Joshua is the WBA, IBF and WBO champion. Of course, he's got the IBO as well, which of course you don't need. But Tyson Fury is a WBC champion and Ring Magazine champion. Joshua can get rid of the IBO. Fury can get rid of the Ring Magazine, and it will still be undisputed because you don't need them. That's the unfortunate thing. For me, I think that you should need it, but these aren't the rules. These are not my rules to make or break. So anyway, I think most people agree that the IBF are the number 1 sanctioning body. But of course, they're not without criticism. Of course not. But anyway, thank you very much. Drop your thoughts below. Click thumbs up, subscribe. Catch you on the next video.